The morning sun filtered through the curtains of the Torres household, casting a warm glow across the modest kitchen. Officer Alejandro Torres sat at the small dining table, his uniform crisp and neat, the badge on his chest gleaming. He took a sip of his black coffee, the bitter taste doing little to shake off the tension lingering in the air. Across from him, his wife Sophia moved around the kitchen with practiced ease, packing lunches and tidying up after breakfast. Lucas, their 12-year-old son, sat at the table, barely touching the scrambled eggs and toast on his plate. He poked at the food with his fork, his face a mix of frustration and dread. Alejandro's sharp eyes caught the unusual behavior. "What's going on, Lucas?" Alejandro asked, his voice firm but concerned. Lucas shrugged, avoiding his father's gaze. "Nothing," he muttered. Sophia glanced at Lucas, then at Alejandro, silently urging him to probe further. Alejandro set his coffee mug down, leaning forward. "Lucas, talk to me. If there's something wrong, you need to let us know." Lucas hesitated before blurting out, "I don't want to go to school. They won't leave me alone." Alejandro's brow furrowed. "Who won't leave you alone?" "Just some kids," Lucas mumbled. "It's not a big deal." "It's a big deal if it's making you afraid to go to school," Alejandro said, his tone serious. "Have you told your teacher?" Lucas shook his head. "It doesn't matter. They won't stop." Alejandro sat back, running a hand through his short, graying hair. "Lucas, you can't let them win. You have to stand up for yourself." Sophia interjected softly, placing a hand on Lucas's shoulder. "Sometimes standing up means asking for help, Lucas. We're here for you." Lucas remained silent, his eyes fixed on his untouched breakfast. Alejandro sighed, glancing at the clock. "We'll talk more about this tonight. For now, let's get going." The car ride to school was quiet, the usual lively chatter replaced by a heavy silence. When they reached the school, Lucas hesitated before opening the door. Alejandro turned to him, his voice gentler. "Lucas, remember, you're stronger than you think." Lucas nodded reluctantly and stepped out, his small frame swallowed by the crowd of students. Alejandro watched him go, a pang of worry tightening in his chest as he drove off to start his shift. The streets were unusually quiet that morning as Alejandro cruised through the neighborhood in his patrol car. He should have been focused on his duties, but his thoughts kept drifting back to Lucas. The boy's defeated expression haunted him. Alejandro wondered if he had been too harsh, too insistent on toughening Lucas up. Just as he was about to radio in for a status check, a blur of motion caught his eye. A car sped past him, well above the speed limit. Alejandro flipped on his siren and lights, pulling the vehicle over to the side of the road. Approaching the driver's window, Alejandro expected the usual excuses, someone late for work or distracted by their phone. Instead, he was met with a frantic woman in scrubs, her face pale and panicked. "Officer, please," the woman pleaded. "I'm a nurse, and I'm trying to get this boy to the hospital. He's unconscious." Alejandro's heart skipped a beat as he glanced into the back seat. Beneath a thin emergency blanket lay a small figure, motionless. His blood ran cold when he recognized the sneakers sticking out from under the blanket, Lucas's sneakers. "Lucas?" Alejandro's voice cracked as he yanked open the back door. He pulled the blanket back, revealing his son's pale face. "What happened?" he demanded, turning to the nurse. "I found him collapsed near the school," she explained quickly. "I didn't know who else to call, so I brought him here myself." Alejandro's hands trembled as he reached out to touch Lucas's forehead. "I'll follow you," he said, his voice resolute. The nurse nodded, her own hands steady on the wheel as she prepared to pull back onto the road. Alejandro jumped into his patrol car, his lights flashing and siren wailing as he cleared the path ahead. The hospital emergency room was a blur of movement and noise as Alejandro rushed in behind the nurse. Medical staff descended upon Lucas, wheeling him away on a stretcher before Alejandro could ask any more questions. "Wait, that's my son," Alejandro called after them, his voice echoing in the sterile corridors. A kind-looking doctor approached him. "Officer, we're doing everything we can. Please wait here." Alejandro paced the waiting area, his mind racing. He pulled out his phone and dialed Sophia's number. "Alejandro?" Sophia's voice was filled with concern. "It's Lucas," Alejandro said, his voice breaking. "He's in the hospital. You need to get here." Sophia's sharp intake of breath was audible through the line. "I'm on my way." Minutes felt like hours as Alejandro replayed the morning in his mind. He couldn't shake the guilt over their conversation at breakfast. Was Lucas trying to tell him something more? Had he missed the signs? When Sophia arrived, her tear-streaked face mirrored Alejandro's anguish. They clung to each other in the waiting room, united in their fear and helplessness. Finally, the doctor returned, his expression grave. "Your son is stable for now, but we need to run more tests. Can you tell us if he's been under any stress or physical strain?" Alejandro exchanged a look with Sophia, his stomach sinking. "He's been dealing with bullying," Alejandro admitted. The doctor nodded. "Stress can manifest physically in children. We'll do our best to get to the bottom of this, but I suggest you talk to his teachers and find out more." As Lucas remained in the ICU, Alejandro and Sophia vowed to uncover the truth and do whatever it took to protect their son. Alejandro barely slept that night, his mind replaying every word Lucas had said over breakfast. By morning, he was determined to find answers. After checking on Lucas, who was still unconscious in the ICU, he told Sophia to stay at the hospital while he headed to Lucas's school. The school was already bustling with students when Alejandro arrived. He bypassed the administrative formalities, his badge and uniform granting him immediate access to the principal's office. Principal Ellen Rivera, a middle-aged woman with a professional demeanor, greeted Alejandro with a polite but guarded expression. "Officer Torres, I hope everything is all right." "It's not," Alejandro said, his tone sharp. "Lucas is in the hospital. He collapsed yesterday, and I need to know why." The principal's face paled. "Oh no, I'm so sorry to hear that. Lucas is such a bright boy. Has there been any indication of bullying?" Alejandro interrupted. "Lucas told me he was being bullied, but he wouldn't give me details. I need you to tell me what's been going on." Principal Rivera hesitated. "Officer Torres, we take bullying very seriously here, but I can't share information about other students without proper documentation." Alejandro slammed his hand on the desk, his patience wearing thin. "My son is in the hospital, and you're worried about red tape? Tell me what you know." The principal flinched but relented, lowering her voice. "There have been some issues with a group of boys in Lucas's class. Two in particular, Ethan Morales and Brandon Valles. Their families are influential, and we've struggled to take disciplinary action without more concrete evidence." Alejandro's jaw tightened. "So you've let them get away with tormenting other kids?" "It's not that simple," Principal Rivera insisted. "We've addressed complaints, but these boys are careful. They don't leave visible evidence, and their parents are quick to push back." Alejandro's eyes narrowed. "Then I'll find the evidence myself." He stormed out, his resolve hardened. Back at the hospital, Lucas's condition took a turn for the worse. The doctor informed Alejandro and Sophia that Lucas's injuries and stress had caused internal complications. To stabilize him, they needed a blood transfusion immediately. Unfortunately, the doctor explained, Lucas's blood type is rare. We don't have any compatible donors in our database right now. Alejandro felt his knees weaken. Sophia gripped his arm, her own strength faltering. "What can we do?" Sophia asked, her voice trembling. "We've sent out an urgent request to other hospitals," the doctor said. "In the meantime, you should reach out to family and friends who might share his blood type." Alejandro and Sophia sprang into action, calling relatives and close friends. But one after another, they were met with disappointment. No one was a match. As the hours ticked by, Alejandro's desperation grew. He stared at his son through the ICU window, his heart breaking at the sight of the boy who had once been so full of life. "I'm not giving up," Alejandro said to Sophia. "We'll find someone." With Lucas's survival hanging in the balance, Alejandro redirected his anger into action. He returned to the school, this time bringing Detective Valerie Cruz, a colleague and trusted ally. Together, they questioned teachers and staff about Lucas's recent behavior. One teacher, Mrs. Delgado, shared a key detail. "Lucas hasn't been attending my class regularly. I assumed he was sick or had family issues." Alejandro frowned. He's been missing school? Yes, Mrs. Delgado said, hesitating. And when he does come, he seems withdrawn. He doesn't talk to anyone. Detective Cruz took notes as Alejandro's frustration mounted. Did you report this to anyone? I didn't think it was serious, Mrs. Delgado admitted. Serious? Alejandro snapped. He's in the hospital because of this. Their investigation led to the discovery of security footage from the school's hallway cameras. Alejandro and Cruz reviewed hours of footage, finally uncovering a harrowing scene. Ethan and Brandon cornering Lucas in an empty hallway, shoving him against the lockers and taking his backpack. Alejandro clenched his fists, his blood boiling as he watched his son's torment. The video didn't show the physical injuries, but it was enough to prove harassment. This is just the beginning, Alejandro said, his voice low and determined. I'll make sure those boys face the consequences. As Alejandro prepared to confront the bullies' families, Sophia called him with urgent news. There might be a potential blood donor who could save Lucas. Alejandro drove back to the hospital, his knuckles white as he gripped the steering wheel. The streets blurred past him as a whirlwind of emotions raged inside. Grief, guilt, and most of all, fury. His son had almost been taken from him, and the image of Lucas lying helpless in that hospital bed wouldn't leave his mind. It was unbearable. The parents of Ethan and Brandon, the bullies who had tormented Lucas, had to answer for what their sons had done. Alejandro didn't care about their wealth or influence. They had protected monsters, and he wanted them to suffer for it. As soon as he parked, Alejandro stormed through the hospital doors. He was a man on a mission, and nothing could distract him. But Sophia was waiting for him in the hallway outside Lucas's room, her expression a mixture of cautious hope and exhaustion. Alejandro, she said, stepping forward to block his path, the hospital found a potential donor. He froze. Her words didn't register at first. What did you say? They found someone, Sophia repeated, gripping his arm. A man stepped forward, and they're testing him now to see if he's compatible. Her voice trembled as she added, Lucas might have a chance. Relief hit him like a tidal wave, momentarily extinguishing his anger. For a brief moment, the weight on his chest lightened, and he pulled Sophia into a tight embrace. But the relief didn't last long. The rage was still there, simmering beneath the surface. As he released her, Alejandro's jaw tightened. I'm going to make sure those boys and their parents pay for this, Sophia. They almost killed our son. They can't walk away from this. Sophia's eyes softened, but her voice was firm. I know, Alejandro. They deserve to face the consequences, but this isn't the way. Revenge won't heal Lucas. He needs us focused and strong, not consumed by anger. Her words struck a chord, though Alejandro didn't want to admit it. His wife was right. Taking matters into his own hands wouldn't change what had happened. It wouldn't undo Lucas's pain or bring back the days he had suffered in silence. It would only risk Alejandro losing sight of what truly mattered, his son's recovery. He took a deep breath, forcing himself to let go of the destructive thoughts. You're right, he said finally, his voice heavy with resignation. Lucas comes first, but I won't stop until they're held accountable. I owe him that much. The following morning, Alejandro met with Detective Cruz in the police station. The two men sat in the dimly lit briefing room, the air thick with the weight of their task. Cruz had spent the previous night reviewing the security footage from the school, piecing together the timeline of events leading up to Lucas's injuries. We have enough evidence to build a solid case, Cruz said, pushing a stack of files toward Alejandro. The footage shows Ethan and Brandon cornering Lucas in the hallway 3 days ago. It's clear they were targeting him, and they didn't stop there. Lucas's teacher confirmed he hadn't been attending classes because of the bullying. Alejandro flipped through the files, his heart sinking as he saw the still images taken from the footage. There was Lucas, backed into a corner, his small frame dwarfed by the two larger boys. The fear in his son's eyes was unmistakable, and Alejandro clenched his fists as he imagined the pain Lucas must have endured. But the breakthrough came when a knock on the door interrupted their conversation. A young boy, no older than 12, stepped into the room. He looked nervous, his eyes darting between Alejandro and Cruz. This is Miguel, Cruz explained. He's a classmate of Lucas's. He has something to share. Miguel took a deep breath and began to speak, his voice trembling. I saw what they did to Lucas. I was scared to say anything before, but I can't keep quiet anymore. They told me if I said anything, I'd be next. Alejandro's heart ached for the boy, but he also felt a surge of pride. Miguel's courage reminded him of Lucas's resilience. He knelt down to Miguel's level, meeting the boy's gaze. You're brave for coming forward, Alejandro said gently. I promise you, no one will hurt you. We'll make sure of it. Miguel nodded, his small shoulders relaxing slightly. With his testimony, along with the video evidence, Alejandro and Cruz had the ammunition they needed to take action. They contacted the parents of Ethan and Brandon, summoning them to the station for a formal investigation. Back at the hospital, the atmosphere was tense as the medical team conducted the final tests to confirm the donor's compatibility with Lucas. The donor, a young medical intern named Carlos Martinez, had heard about Lucas's plight through a hospital bulletin and volunteered immediately. Carlos sat in the waiting room, calm and composed. When Alejandro and Sofia approached him, their gratitude was palpable. Carlos, Sofia began, her voice thick with emotion, thank you for stepping forward. You're giving our son a chance. Carlos smiled modestly. I'm just glad I can help. It's what any of us would do. Alejandro shook Carlos's hand firmly, his voice heavy with sincerity. You're giving us hope when we needed it most. I can never repay you for this. As the test confirmed the match, the medical team moved quickly. Alejandro and Sofia watched through the glass as the transfusion began, their hands clasped tightly together. The minutes felt like hours, each second dragging as they prayed for a miracle. Finally, Dr. Rivera emerged from the operating room, her face calm but serious. Lucas is responding well to the transfusion, she said. It's too early to say anything definitive, but this is a positive step. Alejandro exhaled a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding, pulling Sofia into his arms as she sobbed against his chest. For the first time in days, a glimmer of hope shone through the darkness. As they sat by Lucas's bedside, Alejandro whispered softly, We're here, Lucas. You're going to get through this. I promise, no one will hurt you again. The air in the courtroom was thick with tension. Alejandro sat with Sofia in the gallery, their hands clasped tightly together. Across the room, the parents of Ethan and Brandon sat with their lawyers, their faces a mix of arrogance and unease. Ethan and Brandon, wearing tailored suits, sat stone-faced, avoiding the eyes of anyone in the room. Alejandro's anger simmered beneath the surface as the school principal, Mr. Santiago, took the stand. Under oath, he recounted the numerous complaints from parents and teachers about the bullying, all of which had been swept under the rug due to pressure from Ethan and Brandon's influential families. Their parents threatened to withdraw funding from the school, Santiago admitted, his voice shaking. I was wrong to stay silent. I should have done more to protect Lucas and the other children. Alejandro felt a surge of vindication at the principal's confession, but it was tempered by the heavy cost his son had paid for that negligence. Next, Miguel, the young boy who had come forward, bravely testified about the torment Lucas had endured. His voice was steady despite his small stature, and his words painted a vivid picture of the abuse Lucas had suffered. When it was Alejandro's turn to speak, he stood tall, his voice firm and resolute. My son Lucas is in a hospital bed because of the actions of these boys and the negligence of this school. No child should have to suffer like he did. It's time for accountability, for the sake of every child who has ever been bullied. The judge's ruling was swift. Ethan and Brandon were sentenced to community service and mandatory counseling, and their parents were ordered to pay for Lucas's medical expenses and make a substantial donation to an anti-bullying organization. While Alejandro would have preferred harsher punishment, he knew the verdict sent a strong message. As the courtroom emptied, Alejandro and Sofia held each other close. Justice had been served, but their journey wasn't over. Lucas's recovery still lay ahead, and they would do everything in their power to help him heal. Lucas's hospital room was filled with soft beeping from the machines monitoring his vitals. Alejandro and Sofia sat at his bedside, watching as their son slowly opened his eyes. Dad? Mom? Lucas's voice was faint, but it was the most beautiful sound Alejandro had ever heard. "We're here, Lucas," Alejandro said, his voice thick with emotion. "You're safe now." Over the next few days, Lucas's strength began to return. Though his body was still bruised and his movements tentative, his spirit was unbroken. With every smile, every word, he reminded Alejandro and Sofia of the resilient, kind-hearted boy they had raised. Physical therapy sessions were grueling, but Lucas tackled them with determination. He wanted to walk out of the hospital on his own 2 feet, and Alejandro admired his son's courage. One afternoon, as they practiced walking down the hospital corridor, Lucas looked up at his father. "Dad, I don't want anyone else to go through what I did. Can we do something to help kids like me?" Alejandro knelt beside him, tears in his eyes. "We will, Lucas. We'll make sure your story inspires change." Lucas's return home was met with an outpouring of support from the community. Neighbors, friends, and even strangers rallied around the family, offering meals, donations, and words of encouragement. True to their promise, Alejandro and Sofia began working with local organizations to raise awareness about bullying. Alejandro gave talks at schools, sharing Lucas's story and emphasizing the importance of standing up for what is right. Lucas became a symbol of resilience, his story inspiring others to speak out against bullying. At school, he was welcomed back with open arms. Though he was nervous at first, Lucas quickly realized he was no longer alone. Miguel and other classmates rallied around him, creating a network of support that made him feel safe and valued. One evening, as the family sat together in the living room, Lucas curled up between his parents. The warmth of the moment reminded Alejandro of how far they had come. "Dad, do you think things will really change?" Lucas asked softly. Alejandro smiled, placing a hand on his son's shoulder. "Change starts with people like you, Lucas. Your strength is already making a difference." As the Reed family embraced, they knew they had faced the worst and come out stronger. Together, they had turned pain into purpose, creating a legacy of hope and resilience that would inspire generations to come. As the years passed, the Reed family found peace in the aftermath of their trials. Lucas, once a quiet and broken boy, had blossomed into a young man with a strong voice, a voice that now carried the weight of experience, empathy, and unshakable resilience. His journey from pain to power had not only transformed him but had also sparked a movement, inspiring schools and communities across the country to take a stand against bullying. Alejandro and Sofia, too, had been changed forever. The struggles they faced had tested their marriage, but in the end, it had only strengthened their bond. Their love for Lucas was a force that had guided them through the darkest moments, and they had emerged not just as survivors but as warriors for justice and compassion. Together, they had proven that even in the face of unimaginable adversity, love, perseverance, and a relentless pursuit of justice could heal the deepest wounds. Lucas's story was no longer just a story of pain. It had become a story of triumph, a testament to the power of resilience and the unbreakable strength of a family united. And as they looked to the future, the Reed family knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, stronger, wiser, and more determined than ever to make the world a better place for the next generation. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this story and for watching the video. Your support means the world to us. If you enjoyed the journey, please consider liking the video and subscribing to our channel for more stories like this. Don't forget to hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Your feedback helps us grow and improve. Once again, thank you for being part of this story. We hope it inspired you, and we can't wait to share more with you in the future.